So first of all, what are scenarios? I think many of you probably are aware. I've also just said scenarios are not predictions. So we're not here to predict the future. It's not possible, but it's also not our measure of success. They're not stories about what will happen, and the conversation that this scenario team had was not about what they think is more likely to happen. It wasn't a competition of who's going to guess what's going to happen. They're also not proposals. So they're not stories about what should happen or what the scenario team thinks should happen or what they're advocating for. Okay? What they are is they're stories of what could happen. So they're possible pathways into the future that help us to talk and think about our lived reality today and to inform our choices today. The people who created these scenarios, this is a Cypriot-led, Cypriot-owned process. It's facilitated from the outside by myself and my colleagues, but the participants and the authors of the scenarios are Cypriots. They're a group of Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots, 18 Greek Cypriots, 18 Turkish Cypriots, religious minorities included. It's a cross-section of society, so it's not the usual suspects. The people who were the colleagues of Ipek and Alexandros are entrepreneurs, they're educators, they're lawyers and doctors and business people. There are young people as well, people in their 20s talking to people in their 60s. It was a gender-balanced group as well, which makes a very big difference when 50% of the group is women. So they participate as individuals, but collectively, they're representative of a cross-section of society. And they volunteered an enormous amount of their time. So they've worked each of them has worked over 15 days voluntarily on this process, and some of them, like Alexandros and Ipek, much more than that. So they've really invested a huge effort into this, and they're all leaders in their own right, and people who certainly have other things to do with their time as well, but who believed that this was worthwhile.
I think the same would apply for people from most conflict-affected countries. We have a somewhat difficult relationship with time. Yeah. Maybe in more peaceful countries, the past and the future may be in a smooth continuum. But for us, of course, when we look at the past, we see a lot of complexity. We see a lot of frustration. And you can see here some of the difficult and most frustrating and most traumatizing events of Cyprus history, like the events of 63, 64, or 74. Aspirations like pursuing peace, frustrations like failing in the peace talks, other achievements and triumphs, and other concerns of the present moment. So we have that to look back to, and when it comes to the future, there is just so much uncertainty. It's very difficult for Cypriots to know what's going to happen. It's so difficult that sometimes we just tune out from even trying to think about it because it's difficult and maybe even scary to think about the future. But there is value to looking, but of course there is value to looking back. There are good ways to look into history, like to learn from mistakes, to affirm values, to honor ancestors, to forgive, to heal, to let go. So these are all very valid reasons to look towards the past. But there are also important reasons to look towards the future, especially for countries like Cyprus, to reflect on our possibilities and choices, to identify threats, to develop shared visions, to mobilize for collective action. But of course, the problem is that the future is not really known. But what scenarios do is that they make that unknown future into something more manageable. And that has been, I think, the experience of myself and Ipek and all our other friends that participated in this process with us. It helps you start getting a hold of a future that is fundamentally unpredictable because the future depends on choices that people haven't made yet.
So after intense discussions, we managed as a group to develop a set of 4 scenarios at the end. Our first scenario is no way. It's a scenario of stagnation and inaction. Our second scenario is my way. It's a scenario of divergence and opposition. Third way, the third scenario, is a scenario of peace under pressure. And finally, the fourth scenario is our way. It's a scenario of resilient peace.
Let me provide you with some contrasts of how, first of all, what will the role of the UN look like in each of the four scenarios, and what will the peace process look like in each of the four scenarios. Then I will do a similar comparison for the role of guarantors, guarantor states, and also a comparison of the role of the European Union. So in the world of Norway, the role of the UN is in facilitating, presiding over this peace process that starts again and failing, which feeds disappointment and recriminations and deepening divides. And the prospect of new talks in this scenario, this is a scenario where the prospect of new talks just lingers on, like it does now. I mean, if you ask someone now whether there may be peace talks in the future, people will say, well, maybe there will, maybe there won't be. So this is the scenario where this continues as far as the peace process is concerned, and the UN is still on the ground trying to make that happen. In the world of my way, negotiations do not get off the ground at all due to entrenched divergent positions, and leading to the UN, as Ipek mentioned, suspending its mission of good offices. And in the world of their way, the UN, of course, will be quite central, and the leaders, it's going to be an elite-level negotiation process where there would be little transparency or public participation in the their way scenario. There would be a lot of engagement and guidance from international stakeholders. In the world of our way, in this world, the peace process that is plausible in this world is a multi-track and participatory peace process, which would still involve the UN and the two leaderships. So there was some debate about grassroots peace processes and that start from civil society and somehow transform the process, but we did not think that that was plausible in the context of Cyprus. We thought that a more participatory process that includes civil society but still has track one at the center would be plausible, but going very grassroots we just thought that it was way far out of the culture of the peace process and is unlikely to happen.
Scenarios do not materialize by themselves, just as what we call as future, yes, still unknown, is not an out there reality which is generated automatically and for which we have no control at all. So scenarios become realities through our choices, actions, inactions, and reactions, gradually nudging systems in specific directions. So various civic and political stakeholders can actually regain agency over the future direction of Cyprus by reflecting on how the choices they make today could enable futures which they value. See, I have always felt that a very crucial element was missing at the negotiations, and that was clearly the civic engagement and civil society participation. The link between the leaderships on the one hand and the people on the other hand was simply missing. Even though both communities are very much interested in politics, in the general sense, in the politics of the Cyprus problem, they follow developments, news very closely. But if you ask ordinary citizens, what does federation entail? Or how does it translate into their daily lives? They have no idea. They don't know much. So the missing link is actually that big. So there are only official narratives heard and internalized exclusively and separately on its side. There are slogans, labels that polarize both communities, across communities, within communities, but no real knowledge and awareness of how life would be in a federation. Although a potential federal solution has long been on the table and at the heart of our discussions, we have never developed an evolving culture of federalism or living together, working together, or coexisting together. So this transformative scenarios process as a civil society initiative has provided me with another opportunity to actually work on the other track of diplomacy, try bridging that gap and to search for ways to create a link between the two, ultimately towards a multi-track diplomacy where the communities, the societies, the people regain their agency toward their own future. Yeah, personally, it was indeed very educating and enlightening experience for me. As the name says, it was truly transformative. I think for all who participated in the process at varying degrees and in various ways. At times, we went into despair, we got frustrated, we got stuck in our communal ethnic identities because we all carry the burdens of the past, the traumas of the past generations, the fears of the past generations. And at times during the scenarios process, I personally felt myself reliving the negotiations, but we managed at the end to empathize with one another, to understand one another, to compromise, and to agree. So right now, I feel more convinced than ever that we need to revive the social dynamic and get people to engage into a discussion on their own future and to make them feel empowered, to lead the way, put pressure on the leaderships to act on it, as well, of course, together with the help and motivation of all stakeholders involved in the solution of the Cyprus problem.
I've always had this, I think many of us have, and people I think generally in conflict-affected countries, this obsession of we must do something about this. We must solve this problem, yeah? And in that obsession, I often found myself getting in conflict with others that had different ideas about what the future would be. And I think if you ask me what is my predominant experience of over 15 years of being involved in the Cyprus peace process, mostly in civil society capacities, it's mostly an experience of frustration and disappointment. And I think what this scenario process has helped me with is it has helped me to make sense of that frustration. And how does it make sense? I was hitting against people that were pursuing other futures. And we never spoke about what that other future was. So there I was writing nice poems about the our way universe, which was my kind of approach. And I was hitting against political stakeholders who were more skeptical than me and thought that our way was just a pipe dream and had already committed to a my way scenario. Or I was hitting against other stakeholders who also wanted peace, but thought that this whole detail of the our way approach was just unrealistic, and we just need to, get onto a their way track to just quickly solve it, and then the rest will take care of itself. And because these underlying assumptions that we each had were never discussed, we were all just arguing at each other and getting angry at each other and starting to dislike each other because, you know, I'm the genuine supporter of the future. I genuinely promote the future of Cyprus, but you don't. And I think we all got so tired in all that. And I remember when I was first invited to participate in this initiative, my first reaction to the person who invited me that there is no way I'm going to get involved in this. I'm not doing Cyprus problem anymore. But it has really helped me to be involved in this because I think what has changed in me is that I have become a bit calmer about the whole thing. I don't think there is any value in trying to persuade people the way we have been, that this is how you should be thinking about the Cyprus problem. I think listening more and understanding the underlying assumptions and understanding that everyone is trying the best they can to protect this country that we all care about. And actually for some people, you know, maybe I'm this kind of our way idealist, but I think maybe for some people who are very much committed to the my way scenario, which is not my, you know, it's not the future that I'm pursuing, they're doing it because they also love this country. And they think that this is the best way to protect it. I don't know, maybe they're wrong, maybe I'm wrong, but unless we understand what each other is saying, and I'm not even talking intercommunally here because the divisions have become so deep within each community. Yeah, we cannot talk to, no one is talking to each other anymore. And I really think this scenarios approach can help us to start listening, to understand that we have collectively failed to work out where we're going. And maybe by listening and understanding each other's perspectives, maybe we can see, you know, how we can proceed. Yes, I come out of this process with this personal reflection. The other personal reflection that I came up with regarding the scenario that I would like to see is that even though, I mean, on objective grounds it's prettier, it's also harder. And I have realized that the default of me doing nothing and of others doing nothing, which is the easiest thing we can do after so many years of failure, will lead us into futures that we don't like. And the other alternative is to really invest in collaborating with one another and invest time and effort with an uncertain outcome, but at least that investment has a greater chance of getting us to scenarios that we value more.
I have been involved for 2 decades during the reunification talks. At every time, we had some civil society engagement, but predominantly it was leader-led processes, and basically it was track 1 processes. As one of the persons who were in the core teams, sometimes more proactively, I realized that we need to re-engage and redesign track 2 processes, not only in Cyprus, but in any kind of conflict zone where there is a peace process. These 2 things go hand in hand. You cannot, you know, left one ignored and focus with the other one. It's something that we learned from our experiences. So in this regard, this has been a very valuable experience, and we need to continue in feeding this and widening the impact of this work.
It is a simple fact that in 6 years of no process in the Cyprus problem, the 2 communities, or the gap between the 2 communities, is deepening and widening by the day. So we're in dire need of finding ways for at least the 2 communities, and of course every other one on the island, to start talking. In 5 years to my knowledge, this is the first truly bi-communal initiative, and that's why we love to support it. But this is also a first, not only in the respect that in 5 years it's the first time that the 2 communities speak to each other in a meaningful way and come together thinking constructively about it. It's also, I think, beyond that. To my knowledge, this is the first ever approach whereby a detached, very objective, I'm going to say, but certainly detached way of looking at things, because until now, all efforts, I'm going to say all good efforts, and I exclude the less successful ones, have been designed to promote the solution that every time was discussed. The fact is that we desperately need fresh thinking, this out-of-the-box thinking, simply because the box has not really led us very, very far until now. The fact is also that the Cyprus problem as we knew it is not the Cyprus problem of today. It's certainly not the Cyprus problem of 1963, 1974, the 1980s, and so. It's a new society on the island, new societies. It's a new region. It's a new world, and hence we need to be both pragmatic, realistic, but also inspired. And lastly, the roots of the problem squarely in the past, but any solution can only squarely be in the future.
All this is extremely interesting, and I would like to thank everybody, Mille and Alexandros and Ipek and Erhan and Harry. The issue here is that even in the best scenario, when we're talking about, reflection and action, we are still at the theoretical level. What do we do really next in order to change things, bearing in mind that currently there is no game in town, there is nothing. So we desperately need something that will be producing results.
I can say that it was probably the most diverse group that I have seen convening around the Cyprus issue in all the years that I have been involved. It was boldly diverse. I mean, I think that would be the way I would describe it. So, okay. I think that for this process to prove useful, it would be very helpful if the scenarios somehow become a common language that we can use to understand what our possibilities and what options different stakeholders might have.
I am actually encouraged. This is the most encouraging thing I've seen for the last 12 months, at least. So congratulations, and I mean it. What next, said Michael. Well, we need a target. We need a result-based approach. We need projects. We need people who are interested to engage in the methodology in any way they like. And I think that's what's interesting. I'm here on behalf of Truth Now, which is an NGO trying to set up a truth commission in Cyprus, and I wanted to throw the question to you. Do you see a truth commission fitting in to your scenarios?
We are living in a governance transition globally at all levels of society that is moving quite fast. And I really congratulate you for the process because it fits right into this kind of transition we are moving towards, a multi-stakeholder, integrated, collaborative way of doing things, where governments are no longer the only ones sitting around the decision-making table. There will be others around that. And in that sense, I think you're moving really and moving ahead in the right direction. But there's another reality that's much more ominous and much bigger, and that is the sort of existential crisis that we are living and we're facing. Climate, health, corruption, inequalities that are not strangers to Cyprus either, in fact. So there is, particularly when you look at the last solution, and if you get to the R way, which you will not be surprised, I'm a great fan of, and how you implement that, it will be important to sort of step outside the Cyprus box as well, because the Cyprus problem is no longer just that isolated little problem in a corner that some people would take up every now and then and otherwise not paying much attention to if you were outside the island. It's really situated in a much greater context in which, unless we start finding ways of working together, both at the local level, at the regional level and the global level, we're not going to make it.
The word, please engage more people in these conversations. And just leaving you with one quote that we've been repeating often in this process, that hope is the ability to see the plausibility of the possible and not only the inevitability of the probable. We tend to spend a lot of time saying the probable is inevitable rather than looking at what is really possible and being able to see that possibility. Okay, so I'd like to invite you to leave with that idea, and we'll continue for those who would like to at the coffee. Thank you.